Today we are going to be talking about where to take Godzilla after GvK. We'll be talking about monster action, how to handle Godzilla's character, potential big bads, teasers to future films, and so much more. Welcome back everybody, this is King Kong 19100. Now this is going to be a follow-up video to my recent where to take Kong after GvK video, and if you haven't seen it then be sure to check it out. Godzilla is a complicated character. He's very flexible in terms of story, and there are many places that he can be taken following the events of GvK. And before we get into that, I want you guys to let me know where you would take Godzilla's character in his next Monsterverse film appearance, and how you would handle his next movie. Now, as I said in my last video, I don't want to be too formulated when it comes to forming these kinds of theories, as the Monsterverse does have a consistency issue, and GvK pretty much solidified to me that the Monsterverse is willing to retcon past events to pave the way for whatever the directors or writers want to see. So I'm hoping this new film kind of holds that consistency with the previous films, and it just remains consistent. Now with that aside, let's get right down to it. Now before we talk about the actual monster that I want to see Godzilla fight, I think it would be very important that we see Godzilla actually set Titans in line during this new film. After following up on the consequences that the GvK film brought upon, we should see how Godzilla is holding up and how he's handling ruling over the Titans. We should basically see Dominion brought to screen on a much smaller scale, and the film should briefly show us Godzilla putting Titans in line. Now I know by the end of Godzilla Dominion, Godzilla put all the Titans to sleep, but there can easily be a reason for the Titans reawakening after GvK. Now whether that's due to Godzilla and Kong's alpha roar off, or when Mechagodzilla roared during his appearance, it can be shown that some Titans did awaken and are hungry, and that's where we see Godzilla setting the Titans in line. It doesn't have to be too many Titans, but a few would be very cool to see. I really want to see a monster like Amulok on the big screen, or monsters like Methuselah and Behemoth back in action, especially since those two particular monsters are very much fan favorites amongst all fans. The film should definitely give them the kind of screen time they deserve so those two can really shine. Seeing Rodan or Mothra return would be awesome as well. Now if Godzilla were in a final battle with the certain big bad this movie would bring, it would be very cool to see Godzilla call upon the Titans of his that we saw in like King of the Monsters or in this new film, just like how Ghidorah did when he was planning on using them to terraform the Earth to his advantage. I also want to see Godzilla interact with Kong again in some way, shape, or form. And now onto the big bad that I would like to see, the Opposing Kaiju. I think it would be cool seeing Godzilla fight another monster like Biollante, since genetic engineering was tampered with at the end of King of the Monsters and partially in GvK, but with the creation of Mechagodzilla. I mean, Biollante would make for an awesome villain since she's got an insane design, she's much larger than Godzilla, she's really strong, and she's a standout monster from all the other kaiju that Godzilla has faced in his career. She's really underappreciated too, and is a fan favorite amongst many G fans. So I think she does deserve some time to shine again after Godzilla vs. Biollante back in '89. But keep in mind that Biollante doesn't have to be the one we see in this film. If Legendary could get the rights to him, another monster that I can see totally working is Godzilla having a crossover with Gamera. It would make total sense. A Hollow Earth entry point has been formed in GvK, and if Kong is too busy in his own film, which I talked about in the last video when he's fighting Kamazots, then in this film we can have a bunch of Gaios-like creatures escaping the Hollow Earth onto the surface world. This is basically Godzilla's consequences of GvK catching up to him. As Godzilla awakens to stop the threat of these Gaios, Gamera could awaken from a very deep slumber to rid the world of them, as the Gaios are his natural enemies he awakens to defeat every time they ever escape the Hollow Earth. They could essentially be like the Skullcrawlers to Kong, or the Mutos to Godzilla. So that would bring both him and Godzilla against each other, and we can get a very awesome crossover film between the two monsters. And an incredibly overdue one at that. And as a quick side note, I really hope that newer Godzilla films stray away from the big bad having connections to Ghidorah or being another ancient rivalry. We need newer, refreshing origins for monsters that unfold upon our very eyes. You know, I don't want it to be like what happened with Ghidorah, where he was already established, and you know, him and Godzilla have already met before. And because the same thing happened with the Mutos and Kong and Shinamura and the Muto Prime, all the Titans from Dominion. I want to see Godzilla come across a new enemy entirely, that being Gamera or Biollante, whoever you choose to go with. And I really want to see Godzilla intentionally lash out at humanity for aiding in the creation of the monster like Biollante, again, if they choose to go with her or not. So speaking of the Opposing Kaiju, if Godzilla fights either them or a new monster entirely, then the one he should fight should be bigger and stronger than him, That way Godzilla can overcome the opponent on his own without any help or power-ups. We need more fights with less cutting away also, because again, those are the really just main selling point of the Monsterverse, are giant monster fights that are very high quality and have very cool visual effects. So we need more fights with less cutting away. I mean, the final battle should be more along the lines of 10 minutes rather than 5, and there should be about maybe 1 cutaway throughout that 10-minute battle. Don't make it one-sided like it has been so far. I've talked about this many times now, but, really make these fights more evenly matched. Don't have the other monster or Godzilla depend on a power-up, because so far, that's what we've been getting throughout the Monsterverse films and the Monsterverse comics and supplemental materials. Godzilla's either had to depend on a power-up. It's really made for a kind of stale and formulaic approach to these battles, and I think it's time for a little more creativity when it comes to that. So I wouldn't have the monster or Godzilla depend on a power-up, or even depend on humans. Make the two other monsters also really bloody each other up. I want to see more blood in these movies, because honestly, with GvK, I was kind of let down. I mean, I was really surprised to see that Kong wasn't as bloody as I thought he would be, or even Godzilla. I was expecting both to be pretty heavily scarred and bloodied up. By the end of the battle, both of them weren't that bloody. Even Kong, surprisingly, who has less armor, was not that bloody. And it was just really surprising to see, and I'm hoping that they kind of amp up the blood factor in these movies. Now, I don't want it to be an easy stomp for either Godzilla or the other Titan. I really want it to be an evenly matched, slightly more in favor of the other monster kind of fight. That way, it's a lot more interesting to watch, and as the famous Brutally Hans said, it shouldn't be a question of when is Godzilla gonna make it out of this fight, it should be a question of if he can make it out of this fight. And so one of the things that I really want to see is Godzilla prevailing with sheer will and intelligence, in addition to his strength and durability. We've already seen Godzilla utilize and depend on his durability while fighting Mechagodzilla. We've seen him utilize his strength and depending on that when he was fighting King Ghidorah. And now I just really want to see Godzilla using his other attributes that commonly go unnoticed, which are his intelligence and his willpower. And now onto the story. I really want to see Godzilla, first of all, in terms of the character of Godzilla himself, I really want to see Godzilla have a lot more emotion and facial animations. I think Godzilla needs a lot more expression, and if you heard in the commentary of GvK, Adam Wingard basically mentioned that the creators and the VFX artists really had to mess around with Godzilla's laugh alone, because the company who owns Godzilla, Toho, really wanted to tone down his expressions. They wanted to portray him as just this all-time powerful god, and I think that is kind of holding back the character, because the laugh instantly became a fan favorite, and I think it would be really cool to see Godzilla have a lot more emotion like that and a lot more facial animations, obviously without overdoing it, kind of put a little more emphasis on his facial expressions, because Godzilla is starting to become a character. So I think in order to form a greater connection between him and the audience, that he does need a little bit more emotion. I don't think he'll be capable of really carrying that many more films if he's pretty much expressionless. I think giving Godzilla's characters some more substance without being cliche is definitely needed. Just make Godzilla a lot more emotional in terms of his facial animations and give him a lot more character than he's already been given. Not to downplay what he's been given so far, but I just want to see that a little bit more amped up in his own film, in his own future film. Also, I really think it would be cool to kind of break the formula of, the classic final monster fights in big city kind of thing. Let's start seeing Godzilla intensely fight in jungles and underwater environments against other opponents that can actually breathe underwater and hold their own, like we saw with Tiamat in Godzilla Dominion. Because, let's be honest, in my opinion, I don't know if you guys saw my ranking video of all the Monsterverse fights, but the first real underwater battle we got on screen with the Monsterverse Godzilla was Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah in Mexico, and honestly, that fight was ass. You can barely see what was going on, and there was constant cuts, and it was really, really annoying. So I was actually pleasantly surprised when in GvK they really stepped up the kind of portrayal of the underwater fights. Even though Kong is a monster who obviously cannot breathe underwater, him and Godzilla fought a lot better than Godzilla fought with Ghidorah underwater. And it was a huge step up, not only in terms of the actual choreography, but also the visuals. And the underwater scenes in general are a lot better in GvK than they were in Godzilla King of the Monsters and even Godzilla 2014. So I do think that the Monsterverse should kind of expand upon that and really utilize to their advantage the underwater fights in this new Godzilla film. Just like how we saw in Godzilla Dominion, when we can pretty clearly see Godzilla fighting Tiamat. And even the ending shot when there's a montage of all the monsters and you can see Amulek underwater, That would be really cool to see Godzilla fight Amulek underwater, you know? It would look pretty goddamn awesome. It would look really clear as we saw in GvK, and I think it would be a nice change of direction within the Monsterverse and these films. So since we're talking about the story, this kind of correlates to the next point I want to make, which involves the characters. Now, as I said in the Kong video, give the characters more depth and a connection to Godzilla with a cast that is not bloated. It's super important that the Monsterverse improves their characters. We need interesting characters that are relatable as can be in a world of monsters, and ones that actually make sense. Now, if you think about it, if Marvel can go from making those mediocre films that we saw in like the second phase to recently stepping up their game with creating likable characters, then the Monsterverse can totally do it too. Just write a script that makes sense and stays consistent with what you've already established. It's definitely no easy task, but monster films do need to improve their characters, and what better way to start with that than the Monsterverse? Really try to write better characters. I cannot put much more emphasis on that. That is a very, very important thing that these films should accomplish. Now, another thing that I would want to see in this new Godzilla film is to see it tease two very important films that would turn the tide of the Monsterverse and Godzilla as a character. I would want to see this film tease Godzilla's son. Now, unlike with Kong, who is the last of his kind, which is a character trait that's integral to the character of King Kong, Godzilla has had a son in every single era he has been. He's had Minya, he's had Godzilla Jr., he's had Minya again. There was that mini Godzilla Phillies thing from that shitty anime I didn't watch. I think it's very important that Godzilla ends up adopting a son. It would pretty much change his character from a fairly neutral anti-hero to a good guy with sympathy, willing to defend the Earth and his son without a moment's hesitation if any being were to harm them. Doesn't matter if it's humans, or Mothra, or Kong, or even his own Titans. Godzilla would kill him. Being able to see the audiences sympathize with Godzilla a lot more than we already have would help form a connection to the character that we haven't really felt for this Godzilla in the Monsterverse so far. And I mean, the amount of stories that could be told with Godzilla and a new son would be pretty plentiful in amount, and if you get the right people for the job. I mean, you have no idea the tons of new doors that would be opening, and you know, there would just be a plethora of possibilities to take Godzilla from here on out. So, tease Godzilla adopting a son, or the son's egg being found in the hollow earth for Kong to raise. That could potentially lead to a Godzilla vs. Kong 2 kind of film, or it would bring some tension between the two characters. I don't know, something like that would be amazing for this character. Find a way to tease Godzilla's son, at least. And the second very important kind of teaser I would have is to include some kind of setup to a Destroy All Monsters film. That should definitely be implemented here, since the Space Godzilla-like monster has been teased in GvK supplemental materials. And I mean, a Destroy All Monsters film is pretty much the way to go for this next phase of Monsterverse films. You know, you have a Godzilla film, you have a Kong film, maybe a Mothra or Rodan film, if they figure out a way to actually improve those two monsters, or even a Gamera film. After those three kind of solo films, then you build up to the grand finale, you know, the Avengers, that kind of movie, Destroy All Monsters. And now this last thing I want to discuss, it's definitely extra. It doesn't really have to correlate to the film that Godzilla is going to be in. I guess it does, but it's more so of like a collection of what we've seen in the Monsterverse as a whole. But when it comes to the supplementary materials, one thing that's just absolutely important to me is an official Titan guidebook, all with completed bios and stats of the kaiju we've seen in the Monsterverse so far. I mean, that is extremely needed, as so far there are a lot of just messed up stats and a lot of creatures that go unexplained in this universe. I mean, I would really want to see a Titan guidebook with completed stats. You know, the same kind of old Toho guidebooks where they have the front profile and the side profile of the monsters. We need like a page dedicated to each Titan. Highly detailed bios and stats. Have it arranged by each film's era it takes place in. I want to see them discuss the power levels, whether they're destroyers or protectors, all of that kind of good stuff. Personally, I would either have it arranged as each film's era it takes place in, like the Godzilla 2014 era, Kong Skull Island, King of the Monsters, and GvK, you know, that kind of thing. Or I would have it take place chronologically. Now, if I were in charge of creating a Titan guidebook, I would definitely order it in terms of film era. You know, you have Godzilla 2014, Kong Skull Island, King of the Monsters, and GvK. So, start it off by giving us the monsters from the Godzilla 2014 film era. So this would include the Shinamura and the Muto pair, Godzilla with his 2014 stats, and the skeleton of Dagon. I would explain why this Godzilla was much slower and had a less powerful atomic breath. I don't buy the Muto EMPs affecting Godzilla's atomic breath, as that kind of contradicted what we saw on screen. We never really saw that play out on screen, and Godzilla's overall biology was altered from 2014 to King of the Monsters, with Godzilla's atomic breath being changed from bioelectrical to bionuclear. I mean, I know the novel explains that there's a flame in Godzilla's throat that sparks the atomic breath and actually lights it. Pretty much like gasoline to a lighter. I mean, still, that was pretty much changed in 2019, and in the creature bio for Godzilla, you know, that spark is never even mentioned. So, I mean, they can still explain the weaker atomic breath as just saying Godzilla was radiation deprived in 2014, you know, that when he gets out of hibernation, he's tired and he's weaker and he needs to gain energy, just like we've seen so far. I think it makes a lot more sense than the Muto's EMPs causing his atomic breath to weaken, which we never really saw play out on screen. If they do explain it was the EMP, great. Explain why we never saw it on screen. And include the out-universe explanation. I mean, it's pretty simple. Like, Gareth Edwards wanted the atomic breath to look realistic and like a flamethrower, and Michael Dougherty wanted to change it. It's that simple, so in-universe explanation, out-universe explanation. That's what I want to see. After the Godzilla 2014 era, we would get the Kong Skull Island era. So this would include all the monsters we saw in Kong Skull Island from 1973 to 1995 in Skull Island: The Birth of Kong. Completed with official bios and stats including height, weight, and length for each monster. Explain shit we don't have answers for, like how there's oversized mother long legs despite them being stated to grow only 25 feet tall. Same with the Spirit Tiger later on in Kingdom Kong being 100 plus feet tall, despite them listed as, you know, only growing like 12 feet tall. Give us explanations for Kong's parents and their sizes being 200 to 250 feet tall. I mean, were they even fully grown? We know other Kongs grew to 300 plus feet tall, which we see in GvK, Kingdom Kong, and King of the Monsters. So Arvid Nelson, who's the writer of Birth of Kong, had a theory that Kongs grow and shrink based on the environments they're in and their predatory range, but to me, that makes no sense at all. Kong's parents were 200 to 250 feet tall, and Skull Island was full of skull crawlers. By 1973, after Kong kills Ramarak, he's still growing. Kong was the same size as his parents in 1995's Skull Island: The Birth of Kong, despite almost all these skull crawlers being eliminated at that point, if not all of them. How would they even be the same size if that theory were true? Hell, why would Kong grow to be nearly 90 meters in Kingdom Kong if he was fully grown in 1995, which Arvid stated? Obviously, Arvid was wrong about that, and when I had somebody confront him about it, he straight up admitted that he hadn't even read the creature profile at the end, which states that Kong wasn't fully grown in 1995 and was still growing. So, again, that's what I'm trying to say. There are all these mysteries we have so far that need explaining. They need to be answered, and I don't want to see any half-assed answers that make no sense or contradict what we see in the media, like what Arvid said. In this Skull Island era, I would really want to see Kong 1995's official stats, and I mean, this book should basically be like the World of Kong book. Connect what we see throughout the Monsterverse media without causing contradictions. Just expand upon the lore. And then would come the Godzilla 2019 King of the Monster era. I would start off with giving us Muto Prime's official stats, since he was never introduced until Godzilla King of the Monsters was in production. I would also make sure to give stats for Godzilla both pre-nuke, which we see in King of the Monsters, and then stats for him post-nuke. And then obviously give us the stats and detailed bios for all of the titans that we see in Godzilla King of the Monsters. And then finally, give us stats for Kaiju from the Godzilla vs. Kong 2021 era. I really want to see stats for Kong from the events of Kingdom Kong. Give us official stats for Kamazots and the other creatures we see in Kingdom Kong. I want to see all the titans in Godzilla Dominion fully explored and, you know, statted up and bioed and whatever. And finally, give us the stats of the fully grown adult Kong and Mechagodzilla. We need to know their heights and their weights and, length in terms of Mechagodzilla. But I'm really curious as to what Kong's height and weight is. I mean, we know his height, but not his weight. And I also want to see Godzilla 2024 stats, so this can confirm or deny if Godzilla is 164,000 tons or not. I know the stats were botched in GvK's opening credits and stuff, but still, like, they weren't actively retconned just yet. So if we don't get that now, then maybe this Titan book can give us that later. And also, it would be interesting seeing how large the Warbats actually are, as they seem larger than 428 feet in length, because they've been stated in some Japanese guidebooks to be 428 feet, but they look more around like 500 to 550 feet in length. So in short, I think it would be very beneficial to see a Titan guidebook in the future following this new Godzilla film, as it would expand the lore drastically and answer many questions that the audience could have. Thank you guys so much for watching, that's all for now. Please remember to leave a comment telling me where you would take Godzilla after GvK, and where you would take the direction of the Monsterverse. The more opinions are out there, the better, and I always love to read them. And feel free to discuss in the comments with each other. And if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more kinds of Monsterverse discussions or 3D animated Godzilla films, then go ahead and check out my channel and subscribe. Please like the video and remember to comment. Thank you guys so much for watching, this is King Kong 9100, and until next time, bye bye.